In this region interview, I'm joined by Mario Tsirbas from Darwin representing UNTB and Senator Alex Antic in the studio. We get together to discuss the impact of the vaccine mandates and the changes in the CHO directives in Darwin, in the Territory, and the potential impact that that has for human rights and on the rest of Australia. Join us now. Senator Alex Antic, welcome.
Campbell, thanks for having me.
And from Darwin in the Northern Territory, Mario Tsirbas from UNTB. Hello Mario, thanks for joining us.
Hi Cam, hi Alex.
We're here because we've got an issue in the Northern Territory and we really want to talk to you about it today, Mario, and find out a little bit more. We understand you've been going through some legal processes and that's still in play. So if we can spend the next 15 to 20 minutes just going through that and maybe share with us and tell the people around Australia what's actually going on, because it's pretty concerning from what I understand.
Yeah, that's right. And it's very concerning for us here as the local residents. So basically in November last year, the government brought into power mandatory vaccine policies that required every worker in the Northern Territory who's likely to come into contact with a vulnerable person to be vaccinated. Now, they designated a vulnerable person as anyone who is Aboriginal, anyone who is under 12 years old, and anyone who's immunocompromised. And immediately we felt that this was an incredibly racist law. It defines as vulnerable any Aboriginal person, regardless of their status, regardless of their medical situation. And this includes some of Australia's best athletes. And we thought that was absolutely disgusting and vile and racist. Furthermore, it basically takes what should be a health directive and applies it in a workplace setting. So immediately we felt that this was beyond the powers of a chief health officer to make a direction that's specifically targeting workers and doesn't mention the people that it ultimately is trying to protect, which is the vulnerable people. So effectively, you have a health bureaucrat making workplace laws. And so we formed a group of about 500 businesses. We got together and created United NT Businesses with the purpose of representing their interests. And one of the things we did was to put a legal challenge together to declare these laws invalid. And that process has been carrying on now since November last year. And we were originally set for a court date this week. But back in March, the local government decided to bring in some new mandates which override the old ones. And very interestingly, Cam and Alex, they dropped the reference in the new mandates to Aboriginal people, effectively accepting the fact that they were incredibly racist in the first place and, needed to drop those. Otherwise, they would perpetuate the racist laws that they brought in originally.
Mario, you have about 500 members or supporters in your network, as I understand it, from our previous conversation. Yes. What's the feeling on the ground in Darwin? Because you're obviously very passionate and connected with this. What's the feeling, the general feeling in the commercial sector and more broadly on the ground?
Well, it's brought a lot of problems into the business sector, regardless of which industry you're in. We've always struggled here in the Northern Territory to access a good pool of potential employee candidates, and introducing laws where thousands of workers are now excluded from the workplace has just exacerbated that to no end. It's brought a lot of uncertainty in the implementation. So there's been a lot of criticism from many different groups, aside from our own, about the inconsistencies in the law. For instance, you can have a mixed race couple, say an Aboriginal husband and a non-Aboriginal wife. They can spend all their family time at home together, but they can't go into work together. If you're Aboriginal and you want to coach your child's footy team, you can't do that. There's just so many consequences that the government didn't anticipate by bringing in these laws that have been played out over the last few months, and they've brought a lot of stress, a lot of discomfort. And we know very sadly that a lot of people have lost their businesses, they've lost their homes, and mental health here at the moment is at an all-time low. At the same time as these mandates have been coming out, we've seen an explosion in crime throughout the Northern Territory, and particularly in Central Australia, that the local government here is just digging their head in the sand and saying, there's nothing to see here, there's no problem. We have countless break-ins, assaults, domestic violence rates through the roof, and nothing is being done about it, and the people are crying out for help.
I was just going to bring in Alex here, because you've come today from the judicial review in this state, in South Australia.
Yeah, that's right, Cam. Look, I have, and it's a rolling, I guess, show in the Supreme Court here in South Australia as well. It's been adjourned a number of times similarly. I mean, they're quite unprecedented actions. Yeah. This is a judicial review action, which
so the
is
same stalling.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't had that much of a close interaction with it, but certainly what we're dealing with are very unique pieces of litigation. They're really calling on the court to intervene in what is seen as being almost a misuse of the Emergency Management Act here in South Australia, which is a piece of legislation that was designed really for the purposes of acting when there's a bushfire or a flood. And of course, that's 2 years ago those amendments were made. April 2020 was when our amendments were made, and that gave birth to the ability for the State Controller, who's our Commissioner of Police here, to make fairly broad and sweeping directions under the Act, which have included mandates.
Which sounds very similar to what's happening.
Yeah, I think it is. And look, I think we're seeing a very similar pattern, in many parts of the country and the world. And, it is unfortunate. I mean, I've been a voice for medical autonomy and individual choice and freedom. It's disappointing to see those things thrown away, particularly when, in many instances, the science is so muddy. And we've seen that time and time again. I mean, I for one, have a real issue with not being told the medical basis for these. I've asked for that information myself here through the Freedom of Information process and have really had no evidence shown to support the mandates as being a legitimate going concern. I mean, the whole idea of them is to protect the community, whoever that may be, and yet, the bureaucracy here hasn't been able to provide evidence that it's a real thing.
Mario, I think in the Territory you also asked for evidence or information, didn't get much satisfaction. Is that right?
Yeah. So when we initiated our judicial review, when we received the Chief Health Officer's affidavit, one of the first paragraphs specifically states that the Chief Health Officer did not keep any written notes in regard to his deliberations to make these mandates, which is just preposterous. Now, if you have the justification, you have the science, share it with people, show the leadership. The people are scared, they're worried about what's going to happen to them in the future, and they require strong leadership. And strong leadership comes when you can speak your vision and bring people along with you. And hiding all the facts and hiding the data does nothing to support that kind of leadership. In fact, what we've seen here in the Northern Territory is our local government introduced laws last month to change our Public and Health Emergency Act to extend the powers of the Chief Health Officer for up to 2 years after an emergency is declared.
This is for another 2 years, is that right?
This is for 2 years after an emergency has ended. So we're talking about unprecedented powers that have never been seen before in this nation. Further than that, there's no ability for holding the CHO to account. There's no obligation for the Chief Health Officer to report, to justify, to show evidence whatsoever, whether it's to the general public, to the Parliament, or even to the Minister.
Just to bring Alex in here on that, we'll zoom out here on Australia. I mean, this is one jurisdiction, another jurisdiction. This is happening, as you say, around. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of this health advice does flow from higher above. I think we see that through the advice given by the World Health Organization as to how this plays out. And, in life you'd expect that, medical institutions and health bureaucrats would follow advice from a top-down point of view. But these things have to be fit for purpose, and we have to be comfortable in this country that, as Mario quite rightly says, that we're bringing people with us. I think there would be many people in the community who would gain a great deal of comfort from seeing the evidence. And in fact, the last sitting week through estimates, I questioned the Department of Health federally about this issue of stopping people from leaving the country. And why we were doing that. We had a situation where you couldn't actually leave the country if you were unvaccinated, but if you're a foreign citizen, you could. Now, those sorts of anomalies, of which there are many, they provide people with a degree of frustration and a degree of confusion. And the simple way to fix that is to say, well, here's the science. And I asked that question on the day, and it couldn't be provided on the spot. So those sorts of things, I think, lead to community confidence draining away from the system, and in many ways, I think that's why people go looking for answers elsewhere. I think that's part of what we've seen. Show us the evidence. Let's see it. Let's work through it. And people, I have no doubt, people would support anything where they can be comfortable with the evidence. But if you keep leaving people in the dark, it breeds confusion and animosity, unfortunately.
And Mario, you have a situation there. You're representing businesses, and you're so crucial to the territory in terms of what you guys do in terms of employment and adding value and economy. There's a real risk here that you talk to the social and cultural impacts, but there's a real risk to economy as well in places like South Australia, Northern Territory and so on. Victoria has already lost about, I think it's 80,000 people. Yeah. You must be losing some people. Are you seeing this on the ground already?
Yes, we are. We are, for sure. And what's more worrying is that we're losing some long-term residents. We've always had a bit of a transient population. A lot of people come up for a bit of a sea change and get away from the cold, down south. And, they might stay for 12 months, 2-3 years, and then they move back to their home states. However, now we're seeing long-term families, businesses just pull up sticks and say enough is enough. And the mandates are really important, an important reason for that, but more so it's because we see a degradation across the board. The lack of leadership, where you behave like a dictator and not a leader, is evident up here in every aspect of our community life. And in fact, we're seeing on multiple occasions how our local government has written new laws that backdate to cover themselves or change the past to suit their policy position. So instead of owning up to a mistake or trying to rectify something the proper way, because they have the power here, they're just writing legislation that backdates and covers their backside. And a classic example of this is the new amendment to the Public Health Act, because it retrospectively applies to previous directions made by the Chief Health Officer. So it effectively means that he can do whatever he wants without any oversight. We have now completely handed over, through legislation, control of our jurisdiction to an unelected bureaucrat without any requirement for him to report or to justify himself to any publicly elected official that ultimately answers to the people through elections.
How does this play with human rights? I mean, we're all Australians, right? What's the implication here for?
Look, I mean, I think we've seen some comments that come out of the Human Rights Commission even recently about forcing people. They would. I guess many people would say it's not forcing people, but if you're faced with a choice between your job and to take medical treatment of any sort, I'd say that is a forcing.
Coercive.
It's a coercive power. Look, I think they fly very badly in the face of human rights obligations. There've been some comments that has, as I said, come out of the Human Rights Commission, which have talked about that and talked about the manner in which employers are behaving, occupiers of buildings are behaving. I think from a moral point of view, it's totally unacceptable. And, that's even in circumstances where we could be shown evidence about the efficacy of it. And, we can get into the term efficacy and, what this treatment does, how long it does it for, and so on and so forth. But the point is that when it comes to transmission, my understanding is there's very scant evidence to show that transmission is dampened down by vaccination. And certainly, as the days go on, that transmission becomes.
But the core issue here is one of freedoms and individual stewardship and sovereignty. I mean, it's we're leaving the injections debate
Right.
and so on. So should this be happening? It doesn't sound like it to me.
Well, not if you ask me. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be, and I think you're absolutely right. These core issues of freedom, and where does it lead from here? We've, as a society, become very, I suppose, accustomed to being tracked and monitored, checking in, wearing masks, being compliant. So my concern is, where do we head from here, and what does our society look like in 10 years? We're entering into a zone, I think, which is a very different Australia than the one that we all grew up in.
Absolutely. And Mario, do you guys feel a bit disconnected from the rest of Australia, or a bit isolated in this, or what's your sense at the moment?
I wouldn't quite say disconnected or isolated, but we certainly feel like we have copped the raw end of the deal. Because we are a small jurisdiction and we don't have the pressures that large population bases bring. What we have is a large number of Indigenous people, and disproportionately they do seem to have more comorbidities than the rest of the population in Australia. And instead of targeting and putting in policies that actually come into play and help these people who are really vulnerable and in the proper definition of the word, our government put out this blanket mandate that covers everyone except those who are, properly vulnerable. So when you have people in our society who need help, it's our obligation. And we are Australia. We are the nation of the battler, of the underdog. And I don't believe any true Aussie will be happy seeing someone trampled down. But we need to take action that actually makes a real difference. And up here, we have a government that is so incompetent that they botched completely the rollout of the vaccination program to those who are medically vulnerable, to the tune that we had maybe 20, 30% vaccination rates in the remote areas, whilst in the urban areas we're up around 80, 85. So instead of doing those things that help the people who are most vulnerable, they do the exact opposite. And I think that's where we felt that we copped the raw end of the deal.
So we're coming to a federal election, Alex. You must be seeing this around. You talk to your colleagues in Canberra when you're sitting. There are pockets of discontent, concern, whatever the words are. What do you think can happen here at the federal election? Is there a way of expressing this?
Well, look, I mean, I've been encouraging people, for 2 years to speak to their local members, of course, and I know a lot of people have done that, and that continues to be the main thoroughfare through to parliaments. In the case of the territories, of course, there is Commonwealth oversight, so it's important that obviously the Territorians speak to their senators as well, of course, and their members of parliament again. But look, I can see that frustration's out there. I mean, we had the convoy to Canberra back in February, I think, and it was, I think the police commissioner said this himself, Commissioner Kershaw, that it was the biggest protest that they'd seen in Canberra since the 80s. So, look, this is a massive issue out there, and it's one that politics needs to take very seriously because, there are a lot of people that are affected and a lot of people that, I think even those that aren't necessarily out there protesting that are worried about this. And so I think we're going to see that come up as an election issue, absolutely.
Okay. So Mario, you've been talking to your members as best you can in Darwin?
Yes, that's right. We've been able to have a couple of good discussions with our current member of federal parliament who's up for re-election again, Senator Sam McMahon. And, she's very much along the same lines of thought that, she personally has stated that she supports the vaccination program, but she's very much against the mandatory nature of how it's been rolled out, and especially how it's targeted the workplace and workers instead of those who potentially could really do with the potential benefits. Having said that, we are still a territory, and we do look to Canberra for a lot of help and support, not just monetarily, though we need it because we are billions and billions of dollars into debt. In fact, our territory government is borrowing money every day just to pay the interest bill. So we are completely dysfunctional economically, and socially we are going down the gurgler. So we need as much help and guidance and support from Canberra to help us get out of this mess, because unfortunately our local leaders have proven themselves not to be up to the task and are completely deaf to the calls of not just our group, but many groups across the spectrum.
Well, this has got a social, it's not just public health. I guess if you're looking through the lens of public health, that's what you see.
Right.
But you guys are looking through the lens of business and community.
Yep.
There's also social issues. Mental health, I know that's a concern to your group, Mario. And some of these things are very hard to see. They're not necessarily obvious. So it's a message that we need to take to Canberra and advocate for change, because it doesn't sound like they're really hearing the people. I don't think you've had the best response from some of the representatives in the territory, Mario. So we'll do what we can to tell your story and see if we can get some change. Alex?
Of course. Yeah, look, I think that's right. I mean, some of the stories that have been coming out of the NT several months ago, there was the one, I think, where the Chief Minister up there decreed that you couldn't go within 5 kilometres or 10 kilometres of your house if you hadn't been vaccinated, or, some of this stuff's pretty alarming. And I think there is a sort of fairly compelling story to tell that comes out of the territory. So, yeah, look, absolutely. I think it's got to be told.
So, Mario, what's just to draw this to a close, what's your next step? What's your action step from here with your group? What have you got planned?
So our legal battle continues, but immediately the first step is to get as many people aware of the issue of this amendment to the Public Health Act, which gives completely unwarranted powers to an unelected bureaucrat without any oversight. We need to get the word out there and have as many people understand that this completely undermines in legislation the democratic process. And if that comes into power, I really fear for the future of the Northern Territory. And if Australia can accept one of its territories to pass a law like this, then I fear as well for the future of Australia, because if we open this door, we don't know what's going to come in the future. So that's our immediate step, is to make as many people aware and ask them to contact their local members and even use their vote in this federal election as a protest to get the awareness of what's going on up here. And I'll just point out one thing. When you spoke about the mental health, we can see how this plays out in the incredible spike, the devastating spike in domestic violence reporting that's happened here in the Northern Territory over the last few months. People who are under stress, who are feeling the pressure, they lash out in devastating ways. And unfortunately, there's a huge spike in domestic violence cases here at the moment. And so we do see it playing out, and it destroys families. So these are real issues that have real consequences for ordinary, everyday people.
Well, you've got a crime surge, you've got mental health, you've got economy being challenged, you've got people in despair and lacking hope by the sound of it. So this is the impact of public health policy. So we empathise with the position, Mario. We'll do what we can to help, and please keep us informed as your legal process advances. And I'm sure you'll be talking to people in Canberra, Alex,
absolutely,
as you go forward. Mario and UNTB, thank you for your time today, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam, and thank you, Alex, for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for being with us.